Cathy, I'm so excited to meet and have this interview about your recent book. You won't believe what your child is thinking. Would you share who you are and what's behind this book?
Sure, I'd love to. Well, my personal story is that I have 3 children who are now fully grown. But when I started my life as a professional counselor, my kids were young adolescents. I had the opportunity to start working with other people's children, really young kids, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, to 25 years old. I started learning things from these young people that I did not know as a parent. So the title of my book comes from my experience that this age group of people, 2 through 25, were telling me things I could not believe. Like when bad things happen to their caregivers or in their households, that somehow it's their fault. Or I'm a bad kid because my family's different than your family. And some other things that I was blown away by. And when I went home and asked my young adolescents, do you think like this? They said yes. And I was shocked because I was trying really hard to be a good parent and I had no idea the kids were blaming themselves for things that happened around them, or that they were internalizing a negative view about themselves because of something that happened to them or that happened with another person, or just things about the world that they didn't understand correctly.
You mentioned there were some common things. What are those things?
Number 1, children experience most of what happens around them with the perspective of themselves at the center. If an adult, teacher, coach, parent, babysitter is upset, children, and I mean in this whole span that I'm talking about, 2 through 25, and including many grown-ups, they experience it from what it's like to be themselves in the scenario. They think something about themselves because of what's happening to another person. Like, I'm not a good kid because this caregiver is mad. Or this caregiver won't talk to me for some reason, and they assume that it has something to do with them because no one tells them anything different. They also think, and I'm not talking about just really young children here, I'm talking about people that have childhood brains, which equals up to 25, that I caused this. I don't know the details, but I come home from school, I come home from work, somebody's upset in my house, and then young people think I caused this because they view life from the perspective of themselves at the center, because they're at the center of their lives and the people around them are like extensions of themselves. And then they believe what people say to them. If a frustrated adult said, this is your fault, or things were better before you came along, or how are we going to send this person to college because we don't have enough money, a young person will internalize that as something wrong with themselves, and they'll believe, well, it's the problem about me that's the reason that you're talking about this the way you are. Or if somebody says, what's the matter with you? Get your head on straight. That means I'm a bad person. That leads into my third point, which is kids personalize it. I'm not as good as other kids because we don't have as much money, or I'm not good at athletics, or I'm artistic instead of athletic, or I have to have special education, or I have to go to speech therapy, or I'm handicapped in some way. That life's conditions, children turn into something personal about themselves. And they develop some kind of I am statement about it. I'm not as good as other kids, I'm better than other kids, I don't deserve certain things. Finally, kids make adaptations. Humans are adaptive people. They adapt to their circumstances, and kids adapt to what they hear, to what they experience. For example, if parents talk about not having enough money, or caregivers talk about not having enough money, it's not unlike a child to say, well, here's my money, this will help. They're offering to either not receive what they could receive, or they're offering to give what they have because they don't grasp the situation correctly. They develop strategies, and their strategies like bedwetting, being violent, being withdrawn, self-soothing strategies. These are the things that sometimes get to be a problem and lead caregivers to take their kids to counseling.
You said something about the internalization, and there's a story in here that you start the book with. Share a little bit about that story.
A couple brought their third grade son to my office because he was having anxiety about throwing up at school. He had never thrown up at school. His parents couldn't find any reason whatsoever for him to be afraid of vomiting in the classroom. But every single day in third grade was a struggle to get him to school, even though he'd gone through kindergarten, first grade, and second grade without this problem. So they brought him to my office. We worked it out together. I began interviewing him and using some other techniques. His parents were in the room, and at one point he got very, very quiet, and he looked away, and I could tell he was really uncomfortable about what he was about to say. So I said, "Would you like your parents to go out now? Because we agreed that you could say what you wanted to say in front of them, or I would ask them to step out." And he was very shy, and he said, "No, I don't want them to leave." And then he was very quiet. And I said, "Please tell us what you're thinking, because it sounds like it's important about why it's hard for you to go to school." And he looked uncomfortably at his parents again. And he said, "Well, at home, I went and I told my dad in the middle of the night that I thought I was going to throw up. He told me I'd be fine, I should go back to bed." I went back to bed. Then all of a sudden I sat up and I threw up all over my bed. And that's when I knew I couldn't trust my dad anymore. Well, the feeling in the room deepened. He had shared with us the intimate, personal reason about why he couldn't trust his dad anymore. It was because his dad had failed him. He was no longer a reliable source. So I kept working with him. A few minutes later, he said with a bright smile, "Well, how would my dad know if I was going to throw up or not?" And I said, "Right, good thinking." And he looked at his mom and he looked at his dad and he was like, "They don't know if I'm going to throw up or not." I said, "That's exactly right. You figured it out." And that was the turning point. He did not have a problem going to school after that day, because what he had gotten in his mind, based on his experience, which he internalized and misunderstood, was really a break in attachment with his dad. And no grown-up had any idea what he was thinking, but they had a big problem they didn't know how to solve, which is why I titled my book, "You Won't Believe What Your Child is Thinking."
Amazing. When I read that, I could totally relate to what you shared in that story, because those stories can stick as unresolved ways of looking at the world.
Absolutely.
Into adulthood,
Yeah.
even.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find that when I work with adults, I ask questions that lead me to these same categories. Did you internalize this as being about yourself? Whatever the situation was, how did you adapt to it? And very often, even with adults, the thing that prompts somebody to go get some help is often rooted in a misperception they have or an experience out of childhood where they determined something about themselves that wasn't quite right, or something about the world that wasn't quite right. And we can usually help them fix that.
In about the middle of your book, you talk about the shame barrel.
Okay. Okay.
Just briefly touch on that concept.
I learned this from a colleague. His name is Tom Hilton. He taught me about the shame barrel. He said, when a person has one feeling, they have all 5 of these feelings. And it starts with anger, which is very typical, which is protective response, then hurt, fear, self-pity, and shame. If a person has anger, they have shame. And if a person has fear, they also have hurt, that they all go together. And it's usually people's shame that they're protecting against. One of the ways to help people move past that is helping them understand that it's okay to not be okay. that families, environments, communities work the best when it's okay to not be okay, which means I can be aware that I'm not feeling comfortable or I have shame right now. I can be in my shame. I don't have to blame or hide or attack people because I'm in shame. And knowing it myself, I can figure out a healthy thing to do about that shame. Like say to somebody, I'm feeling uncomfortable, I'm feeling afraid, I need some help with this.
Beautiful. I got to the part in your book that said, this is the purpose of this book, truth and power. Say a little bit about that.
It's kind of simple, but kids worry about a lot of stuff that we don't even know they're worrying about. And one of the things that is tremendously helpful to them is to give them some truth about themselves, about the situation. For example, yes, I'm mad, but I'm not mad at you. Or I'm really frustrated because I've asked you to do this several times and I need you to do it and you're not doing it and that's making me mad. Super straightforward, simple language. And also letting children know the truth about what's happening, what's going to happen, and who's going to take care of it. Talking to kids, including teenagers, is simple if you just think about how might they be understanding this, and you turn to a kid and you say the truth in an age-appropriate way. Yes, we're upset. Yes, we're having a fight about this. This has nothing to do with you. We're going to work it out, which we always do, and we're going to stay together. Or if we decide not to stay together, we will both take really good care of you. That's the part that a young person is worried about. And then they're fine. So that's saying a truth that's age appropriate and who has the power to solve this problem. And let me give you another example. This is the kind of thing that kids would be worried about. Hearing about a tornado someplace else or a possible disaster. Children in other countries, bad things happening, stuff that grown-ups talk about comfortably, knowing that they can't really solve that problem, but you don't know kids get activated by that. I had a child say to me, could I send my blanket to the kids in that country? Because this child was impacted by someone else's distress, which grown-ups were talking about over dinner. Because grown-ups know there's nothing that we can do at this very moment about those other kids that are in a flood or a country that's been devastated. But kids hear the details and they get really worried. So just saying this is a very sad thing. Grown-ups are helping kids take care of it. Here's what we can do. And we are going to make sure that you're safe. That's what we can do. And oftentimes they'll say, okay, can I have a snack? Their concerns have been taken care of.
As
right?
being parents.
Yeah, like, okay, great. Yeah, fine. That's not my problem anymore. Now I understand it in an age-appropriate way. But kids hear a lot of stuff that they really worry about because they can't grasp what grown-ups already know about it.
Expand a little more about when you have experience with children exposed to dysfunction in their families. Mm-hmm. So children pick up the subtle cues, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel.
I didn't come up with those on my own. Those are part of communities that help us understand that what people growing up in painful, challenging, really highly dysfunctional families is they learn to not ask for what they need. They learn to not say what's true. They learn to keep their feelings to themselves or not to even know they have feelings because everybody's just all about coping. And a lot of stuff can happen where there's no freedom to say, this doesn't work for me, or why are you yelling at me, or why is someone forcing me to hide in a closet when somebody else comes over. These are really confusing things, but in dysfunctional families, which includes, families with addiction and violence, it's a standard set of rules that people learn without having been told. Don't talk about this. at any point in our family, but definitely not to other people. You can't trust the environment to take good care of you, and it's better to not feel it because there's nothing you can do with it. So just shut down your feelings.
You mentioned more on what children believe.
Mm-hmm.
Share a little bit more on that.
I have a list in my book that I discovered. Virtually all young people have an unconditional love for their parents, for their birth parents whom they may not even know, for parents who were in jail, parents that don't treat them well, that children really are the unconditional lovers on our planet. Their desire, for example, to go back and live with their birth mother, who may have been 14 or 16 or 18 when this child was born, they have an unconditional love for this person whom they have maybe never met. Or parents who mistreat their kids. Those kids still have a love for their moms. Adopted kids have a really strong love for their biological mothers, and they want to maybe go live with her once they're 16 or 14, thinking that she will treat them just right. Another point is that kids know sometimes what grown-ups don't know because they see things, they hear things, that they have information that we don't necessarily know they have. And sometimes they're right and we're wrong. And I tell some stories about that in this book, about the kinds of ways kids know things that grown-ups don't know, like what a partner might be doing, what another parent is doing. Kids have a lot of information in households. Children assume that adults have the same information they have. They just make those assumptions. I tell a story about a married man who takes his grandchild to visit somebody else's home for coffee in the morning because the two of them were up early. Then the young child talks about it at home, and it turns out this young child is reporting the person with whom her grandfather is having an affair. And nobody knows it but the child and grandpa. And sometimes children get in trouble for reporting things that they don't know they should be quiet about. And sometimes they tell humorous things too about that. For teens, peers are actually almost more important than anything else in a teen's life. And as grown-ups, as adults, we don't always consider that from their perspectives, that joining an adolescent peer group is a matter of life and death for adolescents in a way. Their survival in the future depends on how well they join with their peer group, their social strata, and it's way more important than some adults may give credit for it, because this is really a biological drive that young people have to join their social strata. The way young people are affected by divorce is oftentimes different for the young person than how we think about it as grown-ups. Parents want to get relief from this stress in their families. Doesn't mean it's better necessarily for a lot of reasons for young people. And I'm not saying families should never divorce, but young people have pretty serious challenges living in two households, having their band uniform in mom's house and being at the other parent's house, not having their soccer shoes. Both adults are at work and nobody will go get their soccer shoes from them. Not having money because this parent didn't give the money to that parent. Kids are pretty challenged by divorce in some cases, not all cases, but one thing I did learn in my practice is that people can have PTSD from their births. Kids that have really traumatic births often have PTSD. The therapy that I do is actually really effective for helping people through PTSD. And the kids that are in my office are people that are presenting with high anxiety, difficulty going to school, unexplained meltdowns. And what I have found is a common denominator with these kids is they almost always have had birth trauma. And what happens in their births is they get stuck, they may lose oxygen, a doctor helps them, they're delivered, and then all of a sudden they have a perfectly healthy baby that parents take home and think they have a normal child. But various points along the way, the child has emotional meltdowns. And oftentimes that's because they actually had PTSD from their births. They lost consciousness, they lost oxygen, they felt panic that they couldn't go forward, they couldn't get back. In that moment, those young infants don't know that somebody from the outside is going to make it okay. And just like other PTSD experiences, they're activating an earlier time in their bodies. And yes, biologically, the experience of birth apparently is in people's bodies and in their brains. They're experiencing it, and they have moments of panic that nobody can explain. And I have found more than one child that has high anxiety also had birth trauma and were able to make it better through the therapies I use.
In your book, you talk about using a toy, Stuffy, to communicate with kids, to open them up. Say more about that.
Okay. I would say that this is a really effective strategy with kids 10 and under, but I've used it with big kids and they like it too. And that is, sometimes I will ask a question of a third party, like this monkey here, and I can get data from the young client in my office by asking someone else the question, right? Yes. So if you were upset about something that happened at school today, like having to go to the principal's office because you were part of a fight that you didn't start, I might say, did you feel bad about that thing that happened on the playground today? Kinda. Did you feel mad? How about sad? Did you think by chance, I'm a bad kid because I had to go to the principal's office? Yeah, I can see you're kind of sad about that. Well, I was wondering something else. Did you know that a lot of kids get mad and sometimes they actually hit kids even though they're not supposed to? And that even if you do something wrong, you're still a good kid who did something wrong. Did you know that? Well, it's true. Seriously, would you like to hear more about that? Well, here's what's true. On the inside, you were made as a good person. Yes, even you were made as a good person. And even though it's kind of hard for you to read sometimes, and it's sometimes hard for you to sit still, you came into the world as a really good kid, and you are still a good kid even when some of the wrong things happen, even things that you do wrong. So I want you to know that I like you. Yes, I do. And I like talking to you. Oh, you like talking to me too? Yes, well, we like each other. And you are a good kid and a bad thing happened. Sure. Okay. Thank you. We can be friends. All righty.
So sweet. Wonderful. How would they go about buying You Won't Believe What Your Child Is Thinking?
It's easy to find on Amazon. So far, I find it's the easiest to find by its title. You Won't Believe What Your Child Is Thinking.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I guess it won't be surprising to discover that grown-ups think a lot of these same ways as well. These very same tools that work with kids are really useful with people of all ages. Maybe not the monkey, but interactions where you're understanding how is the other person thinking about themselves and internalizing this to be about them. That these tools go across populations and ages.
Wonderful.
So I'm glad to have a chance to share them.
Beautiful. Why would a person want to buy this book?
I've intentionally written the book to be what I think is reader-friendly for people to understand this, because a whole lot of us have parented in lots of different circumstances, And I really want parents to know that if you just take a few moments, all you have to do is ask the question, did you think this? Did you think, and I like to suggest that people do it with an I statement, did you think I'm a bad person when you didn't make the soccer team? Kids will check to see if that's true, and sometimes they'll say, yeah. And other times they'll go like, no, I didn't really want to play soccer. You wanted me to play soccer. It's like, okay, well then it worked out. You didn't make the soccer team and we'll go forward. Or it's an opportunity to sit down with them and very simply say, this is what happened. It's not your fault, or whatever else is true in an age-appropriate way for that child to hear it. What's the truth about this? Who has the power to solve it? And the identity of the young person is what they are all about. Young people are trying to find out from internal and external ways, who am I? How good am I? How do I deserve to be treated? And can I really be my true self in the world and have people love me? And to me, that's really the essence of good caretaking of kids, is helping them be their real selves with socially appropriate boundaries and bring their true selves to the world. And I want parents to be equipped to help kids do that.
What a gift. What a gift you are. What a gift this is. Cathy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to visit with me and have this interview. I acknowledge you for bringing your light into the world through You Won't Believe What Your Child Is Thinking.
Thank you, Sherry, for giving me this opportunity to share it with you and others.